Welcome, everybody. Glad you are here for what DMF is and why it matters for you. So, as you already know, Dynamic Media Facility is the agile broadcast ecosystem of the future. It's being shaped right now. And we have Mike Strein, Naveed Aslam, and Willem Vermost. And today, in the next 30 minutes, stay with us. You're going to find out about what DMF is, why it's important to you going forward, and what it can solve for you, and how to get involved in shaping DMF and what the JT-DMF is. So that's what's happening today. And Mike, I think you're going to tell us first, kick it off and tell us about what you've been solving or wanting to solve with DMF. Over to you,
Great.
Mike.
Thanks, Cindy. And if you didn't hear earlier, I'm the boring one just in the office here, but David is at a hotel. Shows his dedication. And Willem is in an airport in a tiny closet. So I think shows the dedication of these folks to talk about DMF today. From my perspective, we just built a large 2110 facility. So some folks might ask why is DMF even there? But frankly, before we started, the whole concept of software-defined facilities was something we were talking with vendors. This is back in 2018, 2019, and that's really morphed into what DMF is now is really a movement. So I think we're going to talk about a little bit about this sort of stuff, and we have a deck that Willem is going to run through, sort of give you some definitions about what DMF is and maybe clear up some of the confusion. I think first we'll talk about NAB just slightly. What some of the things that were buzzwords of the show certainly were things like all the AI applications that, you heard about AI, everybody hears about AI all the time, but now there are real applications you could work with vendors. Vertical video was a big thing, but I think DMF and MXL were huge buzzwords of the show there as well. A lot of people had the button. I didn't stop by the booth and get the button, so maybe somebody saved the button for me and I can wear it later. But that was a big part of what NAB was all about this year. So and I think my project is finished, but I think Naveed, you're moving towards your project, and I think DMF is dynamic media facilities are a big part of what your team is thinking about. So have you add a couple words there?
Yeah. And it was very interesting, Mike, to kind of understand and learn a little bit more about your project and the concepts that obviously were very important to you a few years ago as you were starting to think about the designs and the requirements and what you needed from the technology to enable to drive your business forward and to kind of really reinvent the media facility as you've done. So for us at CBS and Paramount, specifically in New York, we're embarking on a project to rebuild the broadcast center. And these concepts have been at the forefront of our own thinking as well. So it was actually very gratifying to see a magnificent facility that you've just built that really embraced the possibilities and the capabilities of what DMF is really kind of trying to define today. I was going to ask you a question, Mike. When you were first looking at these concepts, how did you feel about the technology being mature enough to support those ideas at the time when you were doing your designs?
It was nowhere near what we're all talking about now. I think we all recognize the evolution of broadcast facilities as they go forward. We'll move towards this. I think it was a new concept back in 18 or 19 or so, and most vendors are trying to sell you product and they're giving you their roadmap, their NAB roadmap, their IBC roadmap. But we wanted to get 5-year plans for a lot of vendors, and you had to sign NDAs to get that sort of thing out of them. And a lot of our choices were made by vendors we met with that had a real software look to where they were going to get out of the bespoke hardware methodology of doing things and go to more agile environments. And I think that's what really this is all about, is to creating that agile infrastructure to do this.
I completely agree. I think that's certainly driving us forward in terms of understanding what the capabilities are, because I think for us, it's been very bespoke in terms of infrastructure that we have in our facility today and have had for many years. And utilization is key, right? We build bespoke facilities that sit idle for chunks of the day because there isn't a show in there. but we're not using that very expensive infrastructure. It's sitting there idle. So this is one of the things that we want to realize is how do we make better use of the infrastructure that we've built, and how can we pull together and then break apart again those infrastructures for different business needs during the course of a single day, or certainly during a work week, a production week, to support those things. And I think what we're seeing now is that there are technology enablers that are now more commonly available to allow these deployments to happen in a much more structured and practical way. So I think that's really the most gratifying thing that I saw at NAB this year, is that the talk is real, but more importantly, the delivery on the technology is real. And I think, Willem, perhaps you can help us kind of define some of this and share some of what you're already seeing.
Yeah. So maybe we'll let Willem talk. We'll stop talking for a second. How's
Absolutely.
that sound?
So first of all, I make sure you get one of these, Mike.
Yeah, right.
That's the type of button a lot of people have seen during the NAB. But also what I've seen at NAB was 2110 is done and dusted, right? There are companies out there that sell very cheap vision switchers. So in my opinion, this is really 10 years old already. But what you guys have said resonates totally with what I've seen or heard in the EBU community about what they wanted to build as well. One of the early movers was CBC with their 2110 facility, SRF in Zurich, the BBC guys, of course, in Wales. So maybe I'll pull out just one slide to start with, because we're always building on something. Sorry for the horrible slide deck, by the way, but we're building on something, and we're building on the JT-DMF reference architecture, which was out there in 2015 already. So that's more than a decade old. And as early as 2018, I think it was Brad Gilmer and Richard Cartwright who wrote a paper called the Agile Media Blueprint, and already recognizing the potential offered by the transition into pure software. And that's interesting. And if you combine these with the recent things that we see in the market, like the CPUs that are really multiple threads, like an enormous amount of threads, and the GPU capabilities added to this, I think we have a nice cocktail to get this really, really, really started. So I can drive you through the rest of the deck if you wish, but maybe there are other thoughts about NAB that you first wanted to highlight.
I don't have any more NAB thoughts, but I will say there was a phrase you used a week or so ago that we were talking about, that 2110 provided transport efficiency, and that was our step from SDI, and now we can take advantage of compute efficiency, and that's where we can now look at these agile environments. And to Naveed's point earlier, when we broadcasters build things, especially if we support news environments, we build for peak, and it's really inefficient when you step down or step back and look at what you've built and you realize what isn't being used. And to have an agile environment, I mean, it's probably everyone's dream, right?
Well, I think one of the fundamental items, and I think we'll talk to this a little bit later as well, is in order to get to this ultimate infrastructure, there are layers that we need to achieve, and we at Paramount are looking at that. Getting to 2110, getting to an IP infrastructure is kind of like step one. We have to get there so that we can get away from bespoke single point-to-point kind of connections, and we can share the capabilities, the devices, the systems a lot more openly and freely across the infrastructure. So that's kind of our step one, is to realize that. We have several facilities that are already 2110, but this larger project for us is to get to a similar kind of scale that Mike has at his facility.
So probably I can drive you through the deck a little bit, because all the points are touched upon, and it really feels like we have a few answers to all of this. So horrible slide, but don't care about the definition, right? It's during the COVID years, a lot of broadcasters that I'm aware of in Europe, they've dipped their toes in the use of software, and they figured out that if you can combine for certain productions, let's say a few functionalities on a GUI, and one person can operate more functionalities, that you can start to be more economical and more efficient about your productions. And this really kick-started a group within the EBU membership to talk about something that we now call DMF. So it's not a new thing, because you just mentioned already 2018, the thoughts were going in this direction. So what is it? Well, it's designed, as you say, to accommodate for peak back in the days, but we don't want this, right? You needed to build out your facility to make sure that you can have the Olympics or the elections. But there are reports out there, I believe from Skyline, they say 90% of the resources is not utilized. If you look at it 24/7 throughout the whole year, 90% not utilized. That's completely a shame. That's economical, pure waste. So we were putting all these things together and figuring out how to deal with this. And instead of going from the bottom up, technologists as we are, we thought, let's start from the top. What is it that the business does? And usually you start with some sort of a life cycle. And in a traditional facility, it's exactly the same thing. You start to design your show, you plan your show, you provision, meaning you rent your cameras, the staff you need to have, and that sort of things. You configure the show, you operate it, and behind the fact you think, could I done this in a better way? And exactly in a digital facility, it's going to be exactly the same. But of course, we need to underpin the life cycle with let's say a technology stack. So we came up with layers. If you slice the elephant or the problem into the right slices, you can eat the elephant. That's at least what they taught me at school. So it's exactly the same. We slice up the problem in layers, and we say, well, there's a big part which is generic IT. Don't touch generic IT. We just go to the market, we buy off-the-shelf switches, servers, even container platforms. And on top of this, we can now build our media-specific things. Of course, there are things that are cross-cutting, things we need to look at. And those layers are security, of course, but it's nothing new. 2110, same thing. Orchestration, provisioning, and that sort of things. There's one specific layer, just one tiny bit, a tiny piece of the puzzle that we're working on right now, that's called the Media Exchange Layer, or MXL. It's an open source SDK. It provides an asynchronous, I shouldn't say transport, but buffer mechanism to have the video, the audio, the ancillary data, and whatever type there will be in future. And the idea is that we needed this MXL to be compute efficient, because this is going to exchange media within a compute cluster. This is, of course, not what 2110 is. 2110 is a transport efficient mechanism. So if I quickly wanted to show you this, 2110 is not going to disappear overnight. And by the way, I admit a fault on this schema. 2110 should be way bigger, and there should be a tiny cluster of DMF on the right-hand side in which you start to experiment right now. But what should it do? Well, actually, something like this. Imagine you have 3 productions running in parallel. You just deploy the functions, the media functions you need to have in order to run those 3 different productions with their workflow. Now, at some point, you might even think, well, I'm going to have a big production tomorrow, let's say elections, and suddenly you can reconfigure as of course, as a function of the licenses you have available, and also the compute power you have available. So that's a little bit the flexibility idea, right? Moving from the one production to the other, just as a flick of the button or a deploy of containers in order to have your workflow up and running for the production you want to have. Now, this all sounds very simple, but with the EBU, we realized that this is not simple at all. It's very complex. There are layers to this. There is a workflow. Now you can see on every crossing, there are specifics we need to think about. And this is where the EBU community, even we have 115 members throughout the world, we thought we are too small. We need to make a partnership with a lot of vendors, and who's better to go to than the AMWA, because most of the vendors are part of AMWA. And this is actually what's JT-DMF. JT-DMF is the bringing together of all the vendors and the commercial broadcasters, which are part of AMWA, and also the public broadcasters, which are represented by the EBU. sorry, that was the small deck. I hope it helps the discussion a little bit further away.
So let me add something right away. When Willem says he has a small, simple deck, it's probably better than anything I've ever done. So beautiful. Mine are quite often, stick figures compared to that. So thank you, Willem, for posting this in a visual way as well. So thank you very much for that.
One of the things I will mention there is that this deck came out of interest generated, right, Willem? We had a great discussion at NAB. There were a couple of panels there that generated a lot of buzz and a lot of conversation, and it helped kind of galvanize our thinking around how to reflect that. And I echo Mike's point. Willem, you did a great job of actually showing that in a way that even I can understand. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Two great guys. Sure. You guys have been trailheading this. So
yeah. So I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how the JT-DMF is structured. There are, and Willem, you can probably explain the development teams a little bit better than we can, but Naveed and I chair a small team that represents business interests and are concerned, and there were meetings in Geneva, which of course were on Thanksgiving, so there was practically no U.S. representation there. So I don't know who exactly planned that out, but good job. But out of those meetings came a lot of business concerns. So the team that Naveed and I are working on is trying to develop models, both deployment models and business models for how you then sell these to your management. This is a change in methodology and how you build things, and what are the concepts involved in that really the development teams need to be concerned about. What is licensing? How does this work? How do we deploy these? How do we put these in on-prem models, off-prem models, cloud models? How does all this work together? And I think those teams, which I think Willem, you're a little bit closer to, listen to those things and don't work in a vacuum. I know they don't work in a vacuum, but there are business concerns to be thought about.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. I think is worth it. We can't stress that enough, that all of this work is not focused on a particular type of infrastructure. We're talking about on-prem, we're talking about cloud, we're talking about hybrid solutions, and it's really trying to meld the best of everything to give us as customers the most flexibility in terms of deploying the infrastructure, and then give the vendors and the manufacturers an opportunity to provide systems and platforms that can exist in any physical layer, of our choosing.
And I'll add one more point to that is that, vendors know that their custom is the first part of customers, and every installation is typically a custom installation, right? Because we all have our unique workflows where we work, and everyone is different than the other one. So to create this, Agile is used many times in our discussion here. To create an Agile environment means it can be deployed the way the customer wants it to be deployed.
So maybe I'll jump back a little bit just to make sure that we have the message right. It's like MXL or JT-DMF is not just going to replace 2110, right? So 2110, that's out there and it will be still out there. If you have a project coming up, please don't wait because this MXL thing is something you will put on the side and you will add it silently into your business and you grow it on the side. So that's probably point one. The second point to add to this is suddenly, there are products out there which are already into software, and you start to see models like you need to buy tokens or jetons or however it's called, and it's a total different way of procurement. And of course, this is why I'm very glad that you guys are chairing this business group, because that's also a problem, right? How are we moving traditional broadcasters from just spending and investing in a pile of kits that you will be having there for 8 or 12 years into something that's continuously moving forward. So that's a great thing to look at. And also there's going to be a split, because we had some vendors in the early days that said, oh, but we sold you a kit, a full stack. We're responsible if it doesn't work. Now, if it's software, whose responsibility is it? And those are the nice things, of course, to be discussed in a great way. So thank you for sharing those tracks. That's really important. Besides those tracks, there's a lot of technicity to think about. Like if you run those media functions on a compute, how do you reserve the CPU, the memory, the GPU specific to a media function? So there's a group called the CRM, the Compute Resource Management Group, that specifically thinks about this problem and tries to find solutions. Luckily, there are. So this group is moving forward in a good way. There's another thing we wanted to achieve, and it's a theoretical model to make sure that from now on and in future, we don't have synchronization problems anymore. Meaning, the compute facility should figure out how to synchronize video and audio on its own. Because I've seen this as an operational guy the last few years. People, even if it's a 2110 facility, they still needed to make sure is the audio in sync with the video, and it takes a lot of time, right? And if we have a good model in place, we could fix this problem as well. So there's the time and sync group that's working on this. And there's another group, and well, you probably know NMOS, right? To set up connections between senders and receivers. Now in our facility or in our compute cluster, we have memory in which you write and you read. So now we need to make sure that we can set up readers and writers that point to the right bits and pieces in the memory. So those are the four groups: compute resource management, time and sync, the readers and write to make them flow connections, and the business track. Those are the four current groups in JT-DMF.
That was great. Thank you for that. I think maybe in the interest of time, so Willem makes his flight, maybe we should start to look at questions. Cindy, do we have any pertinent questions or ones that are easy that we can answer? Hide all the difficult ones. Oh.
So I think for some of the questions that we have, they're about how to get involved in the working groups. You can reach out to me. I pop my email into the chat here. So cindyz@amwa.tv. So if you want to participate in the working groups, we need people to participate and contribute and get in there and do the work because they're working groups. And then on the business track too, participants, people who are contributing and making it all happen. There are some questions about orchestration and MXL and things like that. And we'll see if we can circle back to you offline on those very specific individual questions. I would say, as Willem, Naveed, and Mike have said, the work is happening now. So if you're wondering how something works together, join in on the working groups because those questions are getting answered, decided, and worked on right now.
Yeah, well, let me do a quick plug for the business one. We're starting our cadence this Thursday, where Naveed will still be in a hotel, but and I'm sure he'll be contributing just as much as he is now. But coming out of that meeting is we want to create some of the models. And, we have user stories for what those models should be, but there's actually some work that needs to be put in there. So we define the models, and then the other tracks that Willem discussed can look at those models and say, yeah, this is what customers want. And those vary between real technical and business models. So we need help there. And otherwise, it's going to be defined by a small amount of people. And it's always better if we got a lot of user input there.
Yeah, and the great thing is, Mike, to your point, we have lots of vendor interest, obviously, right? They want to be able to understand what the business models look like for them. But we would love to have more customer input as well to drive this so that we can, as customers, we can articulate the positions and the different scenarios that are meaningful to us. And I know Mike and I can't represent all of those. We're operating in certain segments of the business that may be scaled differently to you or positioned differently to you from a production standpoint. So the more input we can get, I think the better the end result will be, and the more universally acceptable and useful ultimately it will be.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Naveed. Both of our backgrounds are in networks and stations and whatnot, but I don't even call them that anymore. I call it content creation facilities because that's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what the platform is delivery now. It's all content creation, and that's what we're all doing. And again, it's different. Every place where people create content is custom and has their workflows. So So we need to represent those.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that. I did a presentation at our affiliate breakfast at NAB last month, and it was very gratifying to see so much interest from our 200 plus affiliates around the country, our chief engineers there. There was a lot of questions, a lot of interest around what does this mean? How can it be relevant to a station, a much different scale? And the example that we tossed out was, well, out here I have KCBS in LA who are using their facility, during the day. But on the East Coast, I have facilities. I have a morning show that starts at 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. on East Coast time. But there are production capabilities that are sitting idle, waiting for that same time frame on the West Coast. Wouldn't it be great if I could use those facilities and resources in the morning on the East Coast and then do the reverse at the opposite end of the day where the West Coast production facility can use East Coast resources that may be available or lesser used. So there are interesting concepts of how JT-DMF really can lend itself to better utilization, better monetization, and just overall flexibility and agility for us as production and content creators, as you said, Mike.
Right. And of course, there's
we
always
do.
the early adopters. So we have, there are some people that are way out in front. And, CPC is one of them. I think, Willem, you may have said one or two others earlier, but, these folks are looking at deploying and they're very interested. They're very involved in the process. And we'll look to them to, be pioneers here.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. I was just going to say people were asking for a couple examples and you pointed that out, Mike. Do we feel like, I know we talked about this a couple days ago, do we feel like people have to go to 2110? We've got a couple questions about that. Is there this idea that somebody can jump from SDI straight to DMF? That was an interesting topic we hit on the other day.
I don't think it's a requirement. I think it helps to have platforms there and the experience, especially with your staff, of understanding IT technologies and how they've been deployed in a broadcast environment. I think that significantly helps. I don't necessarily think it's a requirement. If you guys want to jump in and throw your opinions there.
Well, I don't think it's a requirement
Go ahead,
either, but it's a change in business. So if you have a traditional business which has been running for multiple years, then it's quite a step for a lot of people to change and to learn about IP and those sort of things. So if the gap is too big, then that might be an issue. But if you're starting with a greenfield and a lot of new people that already have IT in their fingers and their heads, then why not? But can you buy a DMF today? I don't think so, right? There's a lot of building blocks that, or you need to build yourself, or you have to wait till there's a good solutions on the market. So I think we're in this stage that you cannot say, let's build a DMF completely tomorrow with all the things that I can get from the market.
Yeah, and I think realizing the full potential of a DMF is certainly helped by having an IP infrastructure that isn't bound by those point-to-point connections that are very specific to certain workflows. I think that's really what starts to open up the capability of being agile and flexible and truly dynamic in terms of resource management and allocation.
And for us, by the way, and I speak now with my former hat as an operations manager at VRT, for us, it felt like during COVID, we figured out because we had to. We try to do as much in software as possible, and it's with these little proof of concepts that you try to grasp the concepts and how you can improve your business. And I think when everybody knows how to improve the business, the rest will follow. It's just once you grasp the concept, the rest comes along.
Well said.
Nice. With that, if you're interested in working with everybody here on the working groups and getting involved in the JT-DMF, reach out to us. And for your other questions, we'll do our best to circle back to you offline. And Naveed, Mike, Willem, thank you so much. Any closing comments from you?
Well, I think we're standing at the precipice of a very exciting change in the industry, and it's it's real. This is a lot further progressed than a theoretical conversation. I think Mike's facility, the CBC facility, are all testament to the technology maturing to enable this to really be a reality for content creators.
Completely agree. I think this is what many of us see as a natural evolution. And, you know, being at the forefront of this is an exciting time.
No, it's stepping over IP towards IT. And I'm lucky to be here at this stage to make it happen together with all of you who will join the JT-DMF. So thank you upfront already for that.
Run, Willem. Now boarding group 1.
Yeah, exactly. Run. Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you, everybody.